All right, so we'll get started. Thank you all for joining me here. This is really exciting. I'm Dr. Alice Stanton. I'm happy to be with you tonight. And before we really launch out, I want to get a sense of who's actually logged in and tuning in. So I'm going to launch a poll now. You can take a second to fill that out. This is going to help us know how to divide up our time. Great. All right, so before we begin, I wanted to share a real quick story with you guys about what is making this panel possible tonight. And some of my friends and I really noticed through our own personal experience and journey through high school, college, working life, grad school, and through the experiences of our friends and mentees that really there's a lot that is left to be desired for the training in STEM. And particularly perhaps the soft side of STEM. There's some critical lacks here that we've observed. And just to highlight a few on the personal side of it, we get a lot of technical training, but the soft skills, leadership training aspects, these can often be neglected in the process. And also people don't often get to hear as much of the personal side of career choices and of tips and tricks for navigating career paths. And these are really such game changers. So this is something that we really wanted to address. And so we came in with this vision of helping trainees, especially young women, succeed in STEM. And we really want to empower trainees with these resources, with this information, and we want to build a community of scientists and engineers and tech people who are really committed to helping each other navigate. And we're especially interested in advancing women in STEM, but we think a lot of these topics are relevant to people across the board, in and out of STEM, and we welcome everybody to be a part of this. So last month, we launched STEMX chats, and in STEMX, we try to address some of these topics, and we do that through events. This is actually our first public event, and so glad that you could tune in to be a part of this here, as well as online content through our YouTube channel largely, and then we keep our Instagram and Twitter feed up to date as well, sharing these resources, and then through small groups, which we call core groups, that really provide more of the dialogue and support through this. And so this is what we're doing in STEMX Chat. We launched just last month in June. So this is all very new, but we're excited to make it a reality and address these issues. And so if you want to stay up to date on events, you can follow the link there on the screen, and you can indicate which list you'd like to be a part of. Hopefully we'll upgrade our list management soon, but for now, this is how we're not being held back and we're making it happen. And for the latest updates, again, Instagram, Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right, so without further ado, we're really excited to have you here tonight for our panel. And we have three main areas that we're going to talk about: the PhD itself, PhD in general, and then the second part is going to be decision making, and then the last part is the application process. And based on the poll results from the beginning of this panel, we will take questions as we go and integrate things, and not doesn't look like we need to agonize over the application process section of this. So we can kind of budget our time as we go. All right, so we're really excited to have our panelists here. I'm going to introduce each of them briefly here, and then we'll get started. So Dr. Sadaf Sobhani is an assistant professor at Cornell University. She's starting her lab there. If you're at Cornell or interested in going, it's highly recommended. She would be a great PI. And she's a recent PhD graduate in mechanical engineering from Stanford. Dr. Anna Klimovic is an electrical engineer / computer scientist, and she got her PhD at Stanford as well and is currently at Google Brain. Natalie Saenz is a current PhD student in chemistry at Columbia, and Marjorie is a current PhD student in neuroscience. at Columbia. And I'll be your moderator for the night. I received my PhD in bioengineering at Stanford, and I'm now a postdoc at MIT in Bob Langer's lab. All right, so we're excited to share these different stories and perspectives with you tonight. And feel free again to submit questions to the Q&A function. I'll do my best to integrate things as we go, but we'll also reserve time at the end for last questions and also for final thoughts and parting words from our panelists. All right, so to kick it off, we're going to talk about the PhD itself. And I'd like to ask each of the panelists, what was your motivation for getting a PhD? Why did you choose to get a PhD? Who wants to kick us off?
I'll start.
All right.
All right, well, first of all, thank you for putting this panel together and inviting me. It's really nice to be here with everyone. I wish I could see you all, but it's we're making the best of it. So what inspired me or kind of led me to get a PhD is actually, interestingly, exactly what I'm doing now. I wanted to be a professor, and so that you need a PhD to be able to do that generally. So that's kind of where the early thought was first seeded, and then yeah, and that's something I recommend to all of you, is to look at the jobs that you want to take and see, okay, is a PhD required for that? And let that kind of be the first thought, and then look into it further. And I realized every part of it is exciting, intellectually stimulating, and just opens up this branch of careers that require the PhD or encourage a PhD.
I can go next. So I didn't want to become a professor, or at least not when I was looking at a PhD as an option. After graduating, I took a year and I was doing research, and I realized, hey, grad school, or the grad students that I was working with, that they were doing the same work that I was doing, and I was like, this is a job for 5 years that they'll pay me to study and to teach and to do research, and I love doing all those things. So grad school seems like a good place to be, and the next year I apply.
I can go next. So my initial motivation for doing a PhD was to become a professor. And actually, I am starting as a faculty member at ETH Zurich in the fall. And this past year, and currently still, I'm at Google Brain. So I kind of got to experience both the industry research and academia, and will experience the academia side of it, which was the initial motivation. I would say throughout doing the PhD, my eyes were open to like kind of these industry research opportunities, which I got to experience through internships. And I think both of these are very valid reasons to do a PhD and really interesting career paths. But yeah, in my case, the initial motivation was kind of, I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to be a professor, or just mostly, I guess, that I was really interested in doing research and more design and kind of thinking about the problem from scratch or from a new perspective, as opposed to a more product-driven approach.
Hi, everyone. So I could characterize my decision to pursue a PhD as a way to reconcile a history of tensions, which included deciding whether I wanted to focus on medicine or science. Also, in addition to that, like whether I wanted to focus on science or humanities within academics. So after college, I was trying to decide if I wanted to pursue an MD PhD or a PhD in neuroscience. And I'd even considered applying to PhD in philosophy, and took several months after graduating to make that decision. I realized that, so one important factor to me was just like how available or how good the job market was for these different options, and philosophy was terrible compared to the other options, so that was kind of out of the table. And if I wanted to get an MD PhD, then I would have to do more research anyway, so I decided to spend the next year to 2 years doing more neuroscience research, which I had a little bit of experience with as an undergrad. So after college, I spent a year and a half working in a research lab at Stanford, doing experimental neuroscience on animal models, and learned a lot about what it was like to do more experimental research, and learned a lot about my own interests. So I think like I was able to reconcile some of these tensions just by like learning a lot more about the field and trying out different types of mentorship, like realizing that, oh, I actually like doing research, and went to a conference. And I think that was really made me realize like, okay, I actually really like theoretical neuroscience, and it can actually like tie in a lot of stuff from philosophy that I enjoy thinking about. So it just kind of made sense to go in that direction. Although I think the MD PhD was still kind of an option in the back of my mind, but it wasn't clear that I really, it was just like, wasn't as clear that I wanted to be a doctor. So I kind of went for the PhD, and that's where I am now.
Very cool. All right, well, I'll share my story very briefly, but for me, I think the main thing was the research. It was like the research and innovation, right? I love discovering the unknown. I love coming up with new things. I actually come from a family of artists, and I think this is kind of the origin of a lot of this, but you know, there's obviously a lot of different ways to do that even. But as time went on, you know, different courses that I had, different things that you know, you have these experiences and these internships and stuff that you're trying to sift through these different possibilities. Those were really instructive for me to realize how much I really loved biology, and I loved thinking about how we can harness biology in a way to help people. And so for me, it's, you know, coming up with technologies that can alleviate disease and improve human health, right? And it takes a lot of hard work and experimentation to come up with solutions in those sectors. I know a lot of you are in the audience here interested in industry as well. I think for those in the biosphere, it's kind of interesting to think that really so many years of work are needed to develop technologies that can be brought to market and that can help people. So many years of your own, and on top of decades of your colleagues and other people. So I think, you know, you don't necessarily need a PhD to do that, but it helps, right? Really solid tech development takes a lot of work, particularly in things related to biological systems. New tech that's at the level that could form a new company typically have multiple patents behind it, right? It takes a lot of development, and I think academia is a good place to do that. There are other routes as well, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But what I want to do that I can't do very well without a PhD is to train the next generation of scientists. That for sure, right? That is the benefit of academia that is not the same elsewhere. In a company, you can train new hires or interns, but it's not the same volume or the same level of investment, right? So I think I'd highlight those are kind of like two of the main things that I think led me to ultimately choose a PhD. I also was planning on applying to MD PhD like Marjorie, but we could talk about that more later if other people are interested. But all right, so this is some of the backstory of why we chose PhD. And then we wanted to give you a little bit of sense. I think a lot of people are wondering, you know, what is it like to be in a PhD program? You know, what classes, or you're still a student, but not really. How does that work out, right? Classes, teaching, research. So maybe our panelists can help us paint the picture of what a day in the life looks like of a PhD student. And we have 2 current PhD students where it's really fresh in their minds.
Yeah, I'm still in it. I think I wanted, if I can add a little bit back, that I have friends who also did chemistry and then went in straight into industry as a lab tech, and how their day differs from mine is for the first 2 years in my program, we take classes and we also teach. So instead of having projects given to me, like, here you go, this is the task that we need you to work on. I was taking classes and I was trying to learn more to be able to do research better. And then when I got to, when I joined a research lab, I was asked, what do you want to do? After these classes and having read a lot, I had my own ideas of what I wanted to do. And I was handed a project that someone, like a 5th year, so someone who was graduating, gave to me, but I was also given the freedom to just go off and seek knowledge in a way that in industry you might not have that freedom, because they do have a product there, they do have a more specific end goal in mind. And so, yeah, how a PhD in chemistry works at Columbia is you take classes up to 5 credits. It's basically 5 graduate level courses. And you have to teach for 3 semesters, and that's done at the beginning. I know in other programs that's done at the end. And in the first semester, you find a lab and you join one, and then from that moment on, you're doing research until you graduate. So after you're done with classes and you're done with teaching, you just research. And that's what I'm doing now.
I can talk a little bit about my experience at Columbia in the neuroscience program. So I'd say in general, like the balance between research, teaching, and how much time you get to explore different research labs really depends on the program. So in neuroscience, generally speaking, the first year is a rotation year. You try out 3 to 4 labs, or even as little as 2, and they can be very different from each other, but you ultimately join a lab in your 2nd year. So that's what I did. And I rotated, I came in interested in theoretical neuroscience, but because I had come from an experimental lab, I did kind of half theory, half experimental to get a sense of, okay, like if I didn't actually end up, if theory didn't actually go well, and like at least still do experimental neuroscience. And so now I work in the Center for Theoretical Neuroscience, which has its own kind of own culture within our institute, which is called the Zuckerman Institute for Mind, Brain, and Behavior. And apart from the research itself, which I can talk about in further detail, a lot of what I do day to day, or not so much day to day, but research is the day to day. But apart from research, there's talks that I go to a lot, and a lot of the work I do outside of research is communicating my work. So like learning how to communicate your work as a scientist to multiple different types of audiences is like one of the universal skills you learn in your PhD. And that covers both like oral presentations and writing publications. Coursework, our program has very few requirements, but we have a lot of flexibility in choosing what courses to take. So I took calculus 2 years ago because I needed it, and I hadn't actually taken it in a long time, so I needed a refresher, so I did that. And I am reviewing some probability theory right now. But like the way that I approach my coursework is very different from how I approach coursework as an undergrad, because coursework is instrumental to my research. So it's less exploratory, but people still do explore different topics if they have time. And then teaching, teaching is not required in my program. And I think that actually depends on how your program is funded. So mine is funded by the medical center. So for some reason that means that something about the funding situation means that we're not required to teach, but I have TA'd and I enjoyed that. It's all voluntary. In terms of like research, like I think the biggest difference, I guess it's like a lot of us here are thinking about applying to PhD programs. I think like the biggest difference to keep in mind compared to undergrad is that in undergrad, you're a consumer of knowledge and of the education system, but as a PhD, your job is a researcher. That's your role in society. Your job is to like advance knowledge and like in your field or apply existing knowledge to real world problems. And I see research as a navigation problem. I'm trying to get from A to B. I'm starting with an old map based on the existing literature out there. And I have my compass, my intuition. And I'm continually updating my map as I explore the landscape around me. I get stuck a lot, and that's completely normal. My experiments fail. Maybe I realized like the goal I started with didn't make sense. Now I have to rethink my research question. And those are frustrating moments, and it takes multiple tries to get out sometimes. But that's like really the nature of research. You just like, you're wandering in the dark and you get stuck a lot. But like when you do get unstuck and make progress on your problem, it's really exciting. And I do rely a lot on my community to keep moving. I think I have a good relationship with my advisor, and that's like your advisor relationship with your PhD advisor is like one of the most important relationships you'll develop in grad school, because in general, your PI controls a lot of things, like your work hours, your like career beyond the PhD, like the publications you produce. So yeah, that's like a really critical component. And also just like the research community I'm part of. As I said, I work in the center, and the center is really like this big lab. So it really helps to talk with a lot of different people in the center and bounce ideas. And those are actually like one of the most rewarding experiences, is when you're talking about your research with another scientist who might have a different perspective to bring in. So that's like a little bit of the picture of what research is like. And yeah, I'm happy to answer more questions about Columbia neuroscience, and if anybody has more specifics.
All right. My experience in the PhD, I really felt was completely different year by year. I wouldn't be able to give you a sense for the whole thing at once. In the beginning, it was a lot of coursework at Stanford. You have to complete, in mechanical engineering at least, you have to complete the full master's degree, even though you're a PhD student. So full time, kind of coursework. And then after classes or in between classes or weekends, just trying to like shadow an older grad student and learn from them and contribute in kind of a smaller way to a project. So pretty time intensive first or 2 years. And then quals happen, which are like your qualifying exams. I think different schools call it different things. At Stanford, at least, it's an exam based on coursework. I know some places will do it based on your research. And kind of once you pass that, you're considered a candidate for the PhD. And for me, life kind of changed after that. Coursework was a lot more manageable. There was still some course requirements at Stanford. I think it's like 21 units or something, which is pretty significant still. So I took at least one class for the remainder, mostly. And then my days started to look more like focused on research, would go in the morning and kind of, you know, maybe some quarters I had a teaching requirement or some other obligation, but it was mainly feeling like a 9-to-5 job at least, and then coming home and thinking more about the problems. And then slowly you kind of start to get mentees yourself, so younger grad students who you help navigate the lab, or undergrads. And then towards the end, it's really just about the dissertation and the thesis, and wrapping up your ideas and kind of becoming your own thought leader, and kind of differentiating a little bit in terms of what you came in to do and what you actually do, and that being led by your own scientific intellect that you've developed over the years. And as the previous panelists mentioned, kind of seeded through all of that is conferences, papers, and just continuous communicating of your research with the broader community.
Nice. So I guess one takeaway is that there's definitely similarities across PhD programs and what they involve, but it's also good to check for the particular program you're interested in, what it looks like. I guess it's common to have courses a bit front-loaded, but it can be different. In my case, the courses were kind of front-loaded, but research was also kind of happening from the first semester or quarter. And I guess one thing that felt very different in grad school from undergrad is that you have a lot more freedom in how you structure your time. And it's actually, it's a nice feeling, but it's also sometimes tricky at first because you're not sure where you should be spending most of your time. It's not like you have a list of, you know, you're purely taking courses and you know how much this midterm is worth and this exam is worth, and you can maybe use that as some map towards like how much time should you be spending on each thing. Here, the general sense is, you know, you should be spending a lot of time on research, but it's not like every hour you spend gets like a directly proportional outcome. And so that's kind of one of the interesting and kind of nice things to navigate throughout the PhD. And the thing that I really liked is that, as Sadaf said, like every year is kind of different, every day, and you kind of have this like academic cycle, which does resemble, yeah, being a student in undergrad, but at the same time, it evolves throughout the PhD as well. So yeah, from kind of being the junior PhD student on a project to being the one leading the project and mentoring others towards the end. I also really enjoyed opportunities to co-teach courses and give guest lectures towards the end of my PhD. And I think, yeah, going to conferences and publishing papers, I would say there's definitely kind of waves of like very intense work leading up to a conference deadline or journal publication deadline. And then there's some periods where it kind of feels more calm because you're sort of finding your next topic, or really kind of just spending time reading and thinking about things, or initially prototyping some ideas. So there can be kind of a lot of different things that you experience throughout.
Very cool. I think the one thing that I would add, because I know a lot of people think of like grad school as more class, you know, can I do more class? And I'll never forget my first day of grad school. I walked into my first class and the professor said, "You've all gotten here because you're good at taking tests. Now we're gonna see how you can think." And I think that was, I was really happy that he said that, because it helped me realize that it was no longer about the grades and the test scores. It was really about this thinking process and about, you know, learning how to formulate questions and address them, and being able to systematically, you know, come up with new things and new solutions, and, you know, take the failures with the successes, and, you know, ride the wave of the ups and downs, and keep, you know, taking things from different angles until you get to some real solutions. And to me, I think that's like one of the big values of the PhD, and something that you can really apply to so many different things. All right, so I think I'll want to put out just one other question related to this before we get into like more of the pros and cons and the yes or no's, in which we'll be able to address some other questions that have come in through the Q&A. But just in terms of your research ideas and how solidified those were before you applied to the program, I think this would be interesting if maybe a couple people want to chime in. You obviously, you know, are joining another lab, or you're joining another professor to work under them in some capacity. So, you know, you're not coming up with independent ideas, but I guess, you know, to what extent did you know what you wanted to study going into the PhD?
I can start with that. So in my case, I had a general interest, especially in computer architecture and computer systems in general, but I wouldn't say I had kind of ideas of things or general topics that seemed interesting to me. I was interested in cloud computing and how data centers were changing the landscape for computing. But I didn't have like a very specific project or something that I was intending to specifically work on. And that's totally fine. And I think a very common situation. So you shouldn't feel like you need to have a very specific project in mind to apply or to talk to faculty about your interest in doing a PhD. And actually in my case, I ended up focusing on operating systems, which wasn't exactly the field that I had initially intended, but it kind of evolved naturally, and I'm really happy with how things have turned out. So it's also natural for things to maybe grow in a direction that you might not have expected. And so my advice actually when choosing a particular lab or school to go to is to kind of make sure that you're interested in the general topic, and make sure that you have a good feeling, or that you feel you connect well with the actual group, like the advisor, because these are things that are not really likely to change, whereas a specific project is, you know, very likely is not necessarily going to be what your thesis is about. So it's good to kind of fall in love with the general topic and be open, but you don't necessarily kind of need to commit early on to working on a very specific thing. And a great part of the PhD is finding what problem to work on.
I'll just echo that a bit. My first few months were really kind of exploratory. I had a unique journey into the PhD because I was working in that lab in my undergrad, because I was also at Stanford for my bachelor's. And so I started working in this lab, and the project kind of emerged out of what we were working on, and then the position emerged from that. So it was, you know, very much, as Anna said, you know, take it one day at a time. The project is evolving. There's a need to do more research. Does that match with your curiosity about the project and your interest in pursuing it more? And then it kind of slowly grows. And what I ended up, you know, that project ended up just being one chapter of my PhD. So it can really go from there depending on where you take it.
I guess I can comment. I had more of a professional goal in mind. I had done a master's in the science of art restoration, which was really neat and not exactly chemistry. But I ended up going back to my chemistry and being interested in how light and matter interact, especially when I was looking at like pigments decomposing and just a number of other things that I was like, oh wow, it would be really neat to study this on a more interesting system. And so that's what I was looking for when I looked at groups, and I ended up choosing Columbia because there were at least 3 labs that that worked on having either, I'm not photocatalysis exactly, but looking at how photons and phonons and basically how does light and matter interact. And so now I work with semiconducting nanocrystals, which is an interesting way of looking at that question, I think. So I wouldn't have come to Columbia to study quantum dots, but I had a curiosity, and that's what informed my decisions.
I did not have a specific project in mind coming to grad school. I'd say that it was easier to choose an approach and a set of tools that I wanted to learn as a researcher, which was, in my case, was deciding whether I wanted to focus on becoming a theorist or a really good experimentalist. And then once that fork in the road was crossed, then it was a matter of deciding what was the best community, which lab to work in. And then in the process of kind of working with my lab, them and like reading the literature and going to talks, like the project I work on now came out of those interactions. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that like in your PhD, the work that you do as a PhD will not necessarily be the work you work on forever. So I'm not going to be working on this project forever, and I'll probably switch subfields at some point. So knowing that gave me a lot more relief in the decision-making process. And like the rank of important decisions was more about finding the right mentors and like right approach. And then for me, and then it was the specific project didn't really matter because I realized I could work on a lot of different problems within theoretical neuroscience.
Very good. All right, so we touched a little bit about PhD reasons for deciding for and against, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about that and kind of give our most compelling reasons for yes, getting a PhD, or for no, not getting a PhD.
I can start. When I was considering, I had asked one of the faculty in our department, and he kind of knew me and knew that, you know, sometimes I could be an overachiever. And he was just really honest. He was like, you know, this isn't one of those decisions you make because you, you know, just want to like get another degree, or maybe you're told like people who get more degrees are smarter or more accomplished. It's not one of those things. It's not like an MD or a JD or something like that. He's like, this is a degree for people who are comfortable with ambiguity or interested in really discovering new things and going down a path of just constantly like reframing the problem and pushing the boundaries of what you know and what is known in science. And at least for our field, it would be science and technology. So yeah, that kind of took me back because I was really in that student mindset of like, okay, what's next? What can I apply to next? And I really had to pause and think, is that actually a right path for me? And I only was able to answer that by getting research experience. And my first research experience wasn't that great. I did not connect with the project, and I felt really isolated in the lab. But then the second one turned out to be really great and stimulating, and it ended up being the project that I joined and got my PhD in. So that is just general advice. And then the other thing I want to reiterate was what I said in the beginning that was helpful for me was just think long-term, look at career paths that seem interesting to you. If people in that field don't have a PhD, you probably don't need one. So don't just get one to get another degree, go do the thing you love to do.
I completely agree with Sadaf.
I think a bad reason to pursue a PhD is something that Alice brought up earlier, which is like you love science or engineering classes, the ones that you took in college, and you want to keep like realizing your interest in that. Yeah, like research is not the same as taking classes. Yeah, I also agree with everything that has been said earlier, especially like thinking long term. Yeah.
Very cool. Natalie?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add other than like you do a PhD because you want to do research and the questions that you're studying excite you, and yeah, it's a good job, and I think that if you end up looking at it as like, is this a job that I want to have for 5 years, then that might help.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of consensus on this question. I actually asked this to one of my mentors she was the president of my undergrad university, and she gave me the advice that if you can see yourself doing anything else, go do that. And, you know, this is coming from somebody who had a PhD and was the president of Princeton. You know, she, you know, obviously it worked out okay for her, but I think it really echoes the fact that it can be full of ups and downs. You know, it is not an easy path. You know, for me, it was fantastic. You know, I loved the PhD process. I'm super glad that I did it. I think can also answer this a little bit from like the flip side. So, you know, in terms of the cons of the PhD, I think that people that I know that have done the best PhDs are people who are really interested in discovering the unknown or inventing the not yet invented. And they're really happy to wade through the uncertainty, right, that we've been talking about. And are really excited by that, in fact, you know, and you can get through a PhD without fitting this description. But I think the ones who thrive in PhD programs that I know tend to fit that description. And if you won't be happy dealing with large amounts of uncertainty and possibly of independence, it may not be the most enjoyable experience for you. As far as industry goes, you know, there's so much that you can gain in on the job experience. And I actually had the experience when I was, so I've done internships in a startup as well as a large biotech company. I worked as assistant manager of a conference center before I decided to get my PhD, because I love the research, but I love a lot of things, and I wasn't convinced that it was what my mentor had told me, that I couldn't do anything else. And so I needed to kind of test that, I think, and that was helpful for me because then I gained the assurance that this is really what I wanted to do, and I think that was really valuable, taking that time off beforehand. But I think that yeah, it's really when you enjoy this kind of process that you can thrive. In industry, many things you can just learn as you go. And there's some tracks within industry, and you know, every company is different. It's really hard to generalize. But there are some tracks where you actually cannot apply if you have a PhD, because it is a different track. And PhDs can be expensive to hire, because you're going to be doing the types of jobs that require certain skills. And so, you know, those companies will need to make their budget. They need to figure out how many of what type of people that they need on their team. And so sometimes you know, people have told me that having a PhD is like a limiting kind of factor as well, right? I mean, everything that you do, you're kind of forming your route. And so a PhD is one of those things that kind of forms the route that you'll take as regards to jobs. So I wouldn't look at it necessarily as limiting, but it can narrow your scope of jobs that you want to apply to, which I just tell you because that was something I definitely did not know beforehand. And I learned in my internship experiences. Okay, so I think we covered some good ground there already. I want to go and fast forward to the application process. We're really flying through this time. So maybe we'll do a brief thing about the application process, and then we can try to answer some other questions. There's been great questions coming in through the Q&A, and I think afterwards, even what we don't get to, we'll try to type in some responses, and then you guys are also welcome to follow up as well. As regards to the application process, I think a lot of people have questions about taking time off before the PhD. And so maybe we can, you know, if this was your case, panelists, maybe you can highlight that briefly, pros or cons that you see there, as well as highlighting what you wish you would have known in applying to grad school.
I guess I took time off for between the PhD I'm in now. I had a Fulbright scholarship, and I had a research project that I was doing in a lab in Spain. And but part of the Fulbright is to establish connections, not just scientifically, but also culturally. And they told us at the beginning of the program, we want you to only spend like half your time in lab, and the other half we want you to be out there with whatever like side projects you had applied with, and soaking in Spanish culture, doing whatever. And for me, that was amazing. I felt pretty burned out after college, and doing enough research and like going to lectures for like a good portion of my day, it was enough to like keep me engaged and be like, yes, this is what I want to do. And then having the afternoons to or like evenings to help out with volunteer programs, and I helped with a lot of Moroccan immigrants, and I also got to see so many castles and and hear flamenco music in the streets, and just see art and beauty, and that was amazing. So I wish you luck in finding something similar, but it was a great and I still didn't want to apply to grad school, or like I knew I wanted to apply to grad school at the end of that year, but I was too late, obviously. And in Spain, you can get a master's very easily, and you can apply basically a month before it starts. That's not true, maybe a couple months. And that's how I ended up in a different master's in the science of art restoration, while I was applying to what I thought was actual graduate school. And I think all of this to say that I was really fortunate, and I am grateful for the time that I took off of what I like, some sort of like serious like undergraduate to graduate school process, to sort of let my brain reform after a pretty intense undergraduate experience, and to really be curious and dive into the questions that I thought I wanted to answer through research for 5 years. Looking back, I don't think I would have changed anything. Maybe in the application process, maybe I would have applied to more places. I only applied to 4 and 4 schools, but I had location. I think location is a great way of cutting schools off of your list. It's like, do I want to live in Canada? No, I do not. I'm not a cold weather person, but I still ended up in New York. So I don't know how that happened.
I would say one thing to consider is that, yeah, it's very hard to know what exactly you want to do or what path you want to take until you have some experience in that kind of role. And so I can see some value in taking some time between to explore what industry is like and so on. I think one other alternative to getting these experiences that I would highly recommend is using the summers in undergrad to explore these things. So you can do research over the summer. You can also sometimes do a bachelor thesis or kind of research internships even throughout the year, as well as kind of co-op programs or other ways to explore industry positions. And getting a sense of these will help you give you more information about how you do you enjoy research? What does research really look like? And once you kind of get some experience in that environment, you have more information to make a decision. At the same time, keep in mind that every research lab and every company is different. Each team within a company will be different. So always kind of try to keep that in mind too, as you use the information you get from your experiences. And I saw there's a question about like, how can you find research opportunities in these times today when things are remote? In some ways, maybe that opens your doors more, or I guess it depends what type of research you're interested in, but if it is something that can be done remotely, maybe location, I mean, I would encourage you in general to consider, applying to do research in labs that are, not necessarily local to your own university. I use the summers to kind of explore not only different research labs, but also different universities, different countries. So this was all a really enriching experience.
I would say on the PhD applicant side, I wish I had applied to a few more places. Again, my path was just to be at Stanford and then transition into the PhD. I think it would have been nice to explore a few more options. I also wanted to say this was my first year reading a few applications, and I really want to emphasize there is such a broad range of experiences and reasons why students choose to do the PhD, and they are all exciting on the side of the person reading it. Like some people say, I want to be a gas turbine engine designer at GE or like a similar company, and these are the skills I want to build in my PhD, and this is what's exciting. Other people speak much more I guess philosophically about science and leading their own lab one day and things like that. And I would just say, in your first paragraph, just say exactly why you want to do a PhD, why you've thought it through. When I see applications that start with I like to build Legos as a kid, it's not as effective. But just really communicating that you've thought about it, you've done these different experiences, and here's XYZ reasons that PhD is right for you. So there's not one right way.
Yeah, these are all really great points. For me, the PhD, in my mind, the PhD is a pretty big commitment. So I think that it's really important to explore the option space of careers before actually committing to one. And in my case, I took 2 years off to think it through. And it's not entirely clear the decision was the right one, but the decision-making process helped me learn about what kinds of problems I was interested in, what is research, what aspects of research do I like, do I not like, and because I had a relatively limited research experience as an undergrad, it also helped to work with a different mentor and get a sense of, okay, like how different could two mentors be? And the answer is very different. So that was very informative coming into grad school and choosing lab. So yeah, I would say that think carefully about what kinds of problems are important to you and what kinds of roles you see yourself playing in society. Like these are things that are hard to find out unless you gain a variety of experiences. So taking time to explore that seems like a really important and good thing.
I think these have been really great responses. I think just to summarize my thoughts, I think I really encourage taking time off if you have not had a lot of research experience. It's totally up to you. I mean, it can go either way, but I do think that approaching it with more maturity can be good. When you enter your PhD, at least knowing, not necessarily what exactly you're going to do, but how to manage work-life balance a little bit, how to work well, how to ask research questions, manage a project, even some of the things that you learn just by having like a normal job and you develop and hone. I think that can help you get more out of your experience. But then in terms of applying, I think one thing that I didn't know is that it is advisable to reach out to professors that you're interested in working with. It's good if there are people there where at a school you're applying to you want to do research with, and there really should be, and more than one. Don't go to one university just because of one professor if possible. That professor could move, he or she may not be accepting students. So I think it's good to kind of see, okay, 2 or 3 at least professors that I could be interested in working with, and that may change later on, and that's fine. But at least, initially it looks like some potentials, and it'd be good to reach out to them and kind of establish that connection ahead of time. In terms of what to study, it is what interests you. There's been some questions coming in about choosing a lab, and maybe that can be the topic of a future panel, as will medical school, MD, PhD. That'll be a future panel. And to be a professor, what really that involves, that would be a great future panel as well. So there's some good questions about that. But I guess the quick answer that I could offer now is that you can always pivot later as regards your research area, but for the PhD, it's really what do you want your main expertise to be in? And do your homework, do the best you can with that. But then when it comes to choosing a lab, the funding matters a whole lot in the sciences. The people, the lab culture matters a lot. The track record of the professor for graduating students matters, as well as the scientific question. And I would actually probably put them in that order, but those are all factors that do matter a lot. So we are straight up on 9 o'clock, and I can't believe how fast this time has gone, but I want to thank our panelists immensely for joining us for this. I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in. We were overwhelmed by our over 250 registrants for this webinar, which was really fantastic, and I think it's exciting. We're just starting off, and we hope to keep developing things like this. So I'm going to open it up, open mic, if our panelists are available to stay and want to offer any last suggestions, words of wisdom, any wrap-up thoughts. You have the floor. And if not, attendees, thank you so much again, and hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you so much for organizing, Alice, and thanks everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and please feel free to reach out to me with other questions, and I'm really open to speaking with you guys.
I think a lot of the questions that I see in the here are like, how do I get research experience during COVID? If you're interested in research, reach out. Our lab is like I'm looking for an undergrad who maybe want to work remotely or to come in. So you never know what what's out there. Don't be discouraged. COVID, it'll pass soon.
Thanks everyone for coming, and good luck to you all. And I'm happy to answer any more questions, so feel free to reach out to me. And thank you, Alice, for hosting this.
Thank you guys, you've been the best. All right, take care everybody, see you next time.
How did you know when you had found the right culture?
Yes. Are you working on that?
I guess I can just answer live.
Yeah, perfect.
That I don't know, but that I got along with pretty much everybody, and I think everywhere that I had applied to, I don't think I had looked before I had applied to see the size and what sort of what size the labs were, and I think that made it easier since I knew what I wanted in terms of lab size and intensity of projects. I knew that I didn't want to be in an organic lab where you have to be there all hours of the day and night, or biolabs where you have to be tied to the lab in terms of cells and bacteria growing. I was done with that. I was like, I don't want anything that lives.
We're like opposite there.
Yeah, I was like, I need things that are dead. But I think talking to the grad students when you're looking for a culture fit is probably the best way to get a sense of how the lab. Would you say that, Alice?
Sorry, say that again.
Talking to the grad students and
oh yes,
yeah, is like #1 way of.
Absolutely, and the visit weekends are really fantastic for that. I think when you visit campus at another time, it's not the same. And during the visit weekends, everybody really tries their best to be available and to give you the whole lay of the land. You can get tours, you can talk to different faculty. I think the best is to try to talk to graduate students, and often younger graduate students can be more eager to help with those kind of visit weekends. But do what you can to try to talk to more senior graduate students as well. They'll have gone through qualifying exams, can speak to that. They'll have kind of seen what has happened to their colleagues in their cohort and speak to that. So, try to talk to those more senior graduate students, but all of their experience is really helpful. Sometimes you need to get them away from the lab in order to get honest responses. And so I'd encourage you to try to do that, whether it's, to go for a walk if you're in a nice place like Stanford, or to go get coffee, something like that. But I think, yeah, trying to get their candid opinions is really helpful. If you did not get accepted into a PhD program or wanted to defer admission for a year?
I almost accepted a high school teaching job. It was close.
You would be a good teacher.
It'd still be a fun job. If I don't know what I'm doing after this, but I wouldn't mind going back to high school. But it's sort of just as fun to do research, so I don't know.
And Sadaf, you've been kind of silent about your future lab, but
yes,
do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'm definitely very open to having you guys reach out if you're interested in a certain project. We can think about having a remote project for the fall. And if you're interested in Cornell or are at Cornell, then definitely reach out because we can work out something more long-term. As Anna said, this time also allows for remote work. So whereas maybe before I couldn't advise like all these students, if everyone is remote, there's, I mean, I have time for a Zoom chat a couple times a week, and
work on building operating systems and like cloud computing infrastructure. So I'm really interested in kind of how can we improve the performance of computer systems while making them more resource and energy efficient, because we spend a lot of power and energy on these systems, and I think it's really exciting to think about all the different applications that they enable and what we can do to continue that with energy efficiency in an energy efficient way. And so I think my experience at Google Brain has been really amazing, and I've had actually a lot of freedom in picking a research direction. So I chose to focus on looking at storage systems for machine learning applications and how data is pre-processed before you feed it to models to train. But I think, you know, if you talk to other researchers at Google, you'll definitely find all kinds of different topics that they're working on. And it's really nice to have the freedom to explore. And in terms of the future lab, the lab focuses also on building computer systems for cloud applications, machine learning, data processing, all these kind of, how can we enable these applications at high performance and resource efficiency? So I welcome students reaching out if they're interested. I'd be really happy to chat.